So I remember walking into the farm, is what we called Nan's house. And so I walked into the farm one day. Nan had called all of us grandchildren out, and she was in the middle of downsizing. So she was moving from this big, beautiful farmhouse into a personal care home. And so obviously, you can't take all of your furniture, you can't take all of your stuff. And so she decided that this was a good time to hand out Post-it notes. So, growing up, we all actually had an assigned color. And this was based on the toothbrush that we had at her house. So, my color was orange, Abby's color was red, Steph was, I think, purple, Lexi was blue, and DJ was green. And this color kind of followed you throughout your whole life.
Whether you liked it or not.
Yeah, I actually really don't like orange, but that was my toothbrush color. And so, we had our Post-its with our toothbrush color, and, she told us to Post-it note things in her house that we wanted after she passed away. And, this is really at a time where she was moving into the personal care home more for social reasons.
Yeah, she was independent, still driving at the time. Yeah, it was more like an independent apartment.
Exactly. So this is really more about socialization than this ever really was about care. Now, helpful because she would screen her phone calls. And so, we were concerned if she would fall or not. But
well, she had been widowed for about 14 years at the time. So a long time to live by yourself.
Absolutely. So, but no real concerns about we were going to get this stuff, soon. And
right.
I remember Steph being affronted that Nan was passing out Post-it notes to all of us. And, it was morbid and all of this stuff, which, in some ways it was. But in some ways it came from a good place of it was really important to Nan that we got what we wanted. And I remember we're all just standing there in her kitchen and we're holding our Post-it notes, and somebody just stuck one on her. And I don't remember which one of us it was, but we just stuck one on her and we're we're keeping you. We don't really want to have this conversation. But we did, and we went through the house and we Post-it noted some things. And, I don't know that we took it as seriously as she wanted us to take it. And she definitely was still keeping some things. But I know that theme kind of held on, because one year for Christmas, I got the picture that I had Post-it noted. And wasn't,
and it was years later.
It was. But it was, she remembered, and she had decided that she no longer needed it. And then it was, people can think I think people think a whole bunch of different things about that. One, how dare we pick apart her stuff? Two, some people think it's morbid and they just can't even think about it. But I actually think it was really nice, because she was able to give us a gift of, one, for Christmas, she was able to give us things that she wanted. And then when she came to visit my apartment, she was able to see her picture hanging in my apartment. And so instead of, getting rid of things or, waiting until she passed, she was able to come visit me and enjoy a picture that she really had no use for anymore. And I think, sometimes people are well, that's greedy. You shouldn't take things. It's well, we weren't prying it out of her hands. It wasn't something that it wasn't oh, I stuck my Post-it note on this and I came back next week and I took it from her. It very much was, woman, you use all of this stuff, whatever you want is yours. And but it was really important to her that the stuff that she had that we wanted went to the kid that wanted it and would use it and hang it up. Because I think to her, the worst thing that could happen to those pictures that she painstakingly picked out throughout her life is that they ended up in a storage unit somewhere and nobody got to see them.
Yeah, so on this episode of Hey Woman, the podcast that is dedicated to my mom, who we called Woman, Hey Woman, we're going to talk about stuff. And this is, it may seem like it's not a big deal, but as an elder law and estate planning attorney, who prior in my career did divorce law, I can tell you stuff's important.
It is.
It's really important. And there's no right way to do this. So mom, starts out, she didn't consult me or anything, but she starts out with these Post-it notes, and, some grandkids were affronted by it. And that's okay, because here she is, really bringing up the idea that someday she's not going to be here. And that's hard. And so I don't think Steph didn't like the idea. She didn't like what it signified. And Stuff is hard because people fight over it. I can tell you, like in estate work that I do and divorce law, people argue about stuff. I remember I was court appointed for this estate in Northumberland County, Pennsylvania. This was probably like 20 years ago. But the argument was all about the stuff. It wasn't about the money. It was about like the tools and the stuff that the guy had. And it's hard to get people to negotiate or settle about stuff. It's much easier to get people to settle about money. So I think we decided to talk about stuff because it's such an important thing. And what we hope to do is talk about stuff at lots of transitions. So Court is talking about when mom was downsizing, when she decided to leave her farmhouse and go to really independent living, but at a place that also, as she aged, became her personal care home. And she did that for socialization. And it was really a good idea. But we took a farmhouse full of stuff and she had to put it into 2 rooms. So that's like this first downsizing. I remember when she moved in, DJ, he wasn't all that old at that time. He was like, does Nan know she only has 2 rooms? Because she brought as much stuff as she could.
She did.
But then we're also going to talk about, stuff after people pass away and what are some ideas and what we can do to make sure that the stuff gets there. And, to be honest with you, today stuff is hard because sometimes the next generations don't want the stuff.
Right.
And so what do we do with it? How do we decide what to do with it? So, first mom was downsizing. She was moving. And Court, you benefited from that because at the time you had like your first apartment in Boston.
So most of her kitchen stuff actually ended up coming to me. So I didn't have to buy plates or pots, pans, silverware, like all of that stuff was hers. And here's the thing, it's really good stuff. Like it's stuff she's probably had for 30 years, but like those stainless steel soup pots will outlive us all.
Yes.
Actually, my dad and I still fight about it. It is the best pot.
The vegetable soup pot, yeah.
He stole it. It actually never made it to my apartment. She gave it to me. God love her though. I don't know what college junior is making soup. But it was very important to her that I had the soup pot. And so my dad actually took it out of the back of your car because he decided I wasn't making soup. He was right. And so it's been safely at the house. And
he does make soup.
He does. So it actually did make more sense. I say.
And you benefited from the soup that he made while you were in college.
I would rather him have the pot and just send the soup. So it all ended up working out. But I definitely benefited from that stuff. But it's kind of one of those things, well, like, what if you don't have somebody that's like moving and can take all of this stuff from scratch? Also, I do think like, luckily, despite that my toothbrush color was orange, blue is actually my favorite color. And I was fortunate that Nan, you, I, and now even Steph, we all kind of like the same color. I think we could all, like you, Steph, and I could all put our kitchens in Dad's garage and re-pick stuff out and it would all cohesively go together. So, was really fortunate in that, like, we all kind of liked the same things. Now, if you're in college, I don't know that I actually would have cared if I didn't like it because that stuff is expensive to like repurchase, but you can, box some of it up and put it in storage units if somebody's close in age to be going. So like if you think about it, like if I hadn't needed it, it could have been worth boxing it up for Abby. She's only a couple of years behind me.
Well, and some of that stuff did like end up going down different grandchildren because as you got newer stuff or different stuff.
Right.
In fact, quite honestly, I was just in Connecticut visiting staff, and there's a box of stuff that I'm going to take home that now will go to DJ or Abby or Alexi, whoever needs it. So I'll be interacting with them and saying, hey, do you guys want any of this?
Because she just got her wedding registry stuff, which is now, kind of eloped her hand-me-downs. But, some of her furniture, though, I think, one of Nan's greatest disappointments in me is that I didn't want a china cabinet. I don't know that if she's ever seen a Boston apartment, but and I had a 2-bedroom, it was 700 square foot. I couldn't fit a china cabinet in my...
Or china.
Or china. paper plates. You don't really display them in a china cabinet.
Yeah. I think, so I think one of the things, I get often, we just talk about stuff. So taking a step back here and talking about the method that Mom used was the Post-it note, which was really like at the fundamental, like asking people, what would you want? And I can tell you, she kind of carried that through. I was not part of many of those conversations because as the kid, as the daughter, she ended up working with a different attorney at my office because I wanted her to feel as comfortable as possible to make whatever decisions she wanted. But she did very much take that input and crafted what she wanted. And some of it, she took your input, and some she just did what she wanted. But
exactly.
At the end of the day, the idea is that she is asking for your guys' input. And just so everybody knows, when you think about your stuff, that's a way to do it. And the pro of that is you find out what people want. And I think sometimes people are surprised by what they want or don't want. The con is that like sometimes it creates drama in the family because more than one people want things, or maybe it's hard. Because then people start to like, oh, well, then I'm going to take it. Like they don't understand that it's like, maybe I'm just asking for input. So down the road. So, but I would say to everybody, because a lot of times people will ask me, when somebody dies or when we are downsizing, like, what do we do with the stuff? And one way is definitely to get input. And the caveat is just to know that you'd have to accept what people say then. And that can be hard because like, it was probably hard for Mom to like realize that you didn't want her china because she couldn't imagine, right? But that's true of most of like the younger generation doesn't want a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff that was very expensive to buy is now, not worth a huge amount. And that's hard because they worked hard for that stuff. I think also, in some situations, it's hard that the family can't get on the same page. And so some families will decide to have a public auction where an auctioneer comes in and the public's there and family members can bid on things and buy it. You also can have a private auction, and a private auction is more where just the family itself is bidding on it. And I see that work in some families, especially larger families. Particularly after somebody has passed and they can kind of use some of their inheritance. And that's definitely something that can happen. For some people that doesn't work because, maybe a beneficiary who has more money ends up being able to bid more. That's hard. And so you also, I've seen people start at the oldest to the youngest, and definitely in Mom's stuff, she made the decision that, the oldest grandchild gets to pick first, and then there's a turn every time for books and for Hummels, which were something that were really important to her, but, don't have the value that they had years ago. It's maybe more sentimental. And so, you definitely can, have somebody pick and kind of go through things. You also, for sometimes, I've had families, I've been sitting around tables as an attorney where people roll the dice, and whoever gets the highest number gets to pick first. So what I would say is that there's no right way to do this. The person whose stuff it is should have some input of what they think is fair and equitable. So what's the mechanism of which we're going to use to divide up this stuff? And then, it is really important, obviously as an elder law, an estate planning attorney, I have to say it's really important that this is written down.
Right. I think, you make such a good point. It's up to the person whose stuff it is. If we had Vegas style rolled the dice and picked Nan's stuff that way, she'd have haunted us. Yes. That would not have been okay because that's
not orderly.
No, it's not. It's not a system. So that would have been very upsetting to her. Now, honestly, I think about like my dad's mom, who is in very good health, and I, am not putting this out there, but she actually would probably applaud the Vegas style rolling the dice.
She probably would. And she would like hope everybody did a good job at that game.
Yes. So, it's about like what that person wants. And I think that that's really important. I also think, Nan opening that door with the Post-it notes allowed us to start thinking about what we wanted. And, you know, she was in a personal care home. And so, you know, for people who pass at home, you might have a little bit more time with the house before you have to do something with it. The personal care home, we had to get the stuff out pretty quickly. And so decisions had to be made quickly. It's really hard. You're not at your best decision-making capabilities post-funeral. And, you know, I was going back to Boston, right? So, like, I left the day after the funeral. I had been home for about a month at that point in time, and I left almost the day after. And so I had to make decisions either over FaceTime or very quickly, and had to be very clear about what I wanted. And I wanted her nativity scene. And anything else really did not matter to me, to be honest with you. Like, it was, like, I know you'd call me and I always appreciated that, and I could pick things, or like you just picked things and brought them to me, and I do appreciate them, and I've started putting them out in my apartment and different things like that. But for me, it was, I wanted the nativity scene and I didn't care about anything else. And so I think getting really clear, and it feels weird to have those thoughts or to start thinking that stuff until they open the door, because it feels uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable even after they open the door. And so I want people to know, like, it's not that I wanted the nativity scene. I wanted the nativity scene because I remember being a little kid, and I remember the process of putting the nativity scene out every year. So you had to, like, clean off the...
Oh, yes. You better clean it.
You had to clean off the cabinet, which was, like, really important. You had to dust it and all of this stuff. And then you laid down a new table runner. And then you unpacked the Hummel. There was a Hummel nativity scene. And you unpacked them one at a time. And you set them up. And there was a very specific way to set them up. Like, the wise men couldn't be, like, too far from, like... It was all historically accurate, I'm sure. And so, like,
for what's been handed down over the generations.
Exactly. So, you know, for me, like, this year will be the first year I end up putting, like, her nativity scene out, and it's been something I've really thought about, like, where am I going to do it? And actually, I have one of her bookcases, which I'm glad that you kind of pushed upon me.
I did push that upon you. When I brought it, you weren't happy. In fact, I offered to bring more than one, and you said, "Oh no, just one."
But it was one of those things I just couldn't.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like, if I didn't, then I was losing the opportunity. And so you thrust a bookcase upon me.
Put it right in my Jeep and took it to Boston.
Yes. And, you know, I'm happy to have it. And I'm not upset that I don't have other ones. I think if I had taken them, I probably would have found a use for them. I think they could be still in the garage. So,
they are. Yeah.
So it might not be too late. Maybe I'll take one back after Thanksgiving. But I think... what we really want you guys to think about is, you don't want regrets. Like, you don't want to go donating things that you're like, oh gosh, like, maybe I would have wanted. And lots of times when you're downsizing, you know, we're really lucky to have a 3-car garage that we just shoved a lot of her stuff into, and are able to, like, very kind of slowly but surely go through it. Sometimes you have to make those decisions quickly. And so by doing it earlier, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, but, like, doing the giving while you're living a little bit can actually be a really neat way to allow them to be involved in the process, and not feel like, oh gosh, this is just one more thing I have to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. Although before I jump to that, I want to go back to something that you said, because I want to pick it up, because it was really good advice. You know, when Mom passed, everything was at the personal care home, and you say we had to get it out quickly. We actually didn't accomplish that goal months later, but part of it was, like, I did not want to put it into storage, and because I felt like I was just pushing off decisions.
Right.
But I don't think I gave myself enough grace that I just couldn't make those decisions. Like, I feel better now that I could do a part of it. I think about, like, oh, right away I, like, got on Etsy and I order, like, these pillows to be made for all you kids. Well, I still haven't sent the clothes because I couldn't. I've tried, like, a bunch of times, but couldn't do it. But actually, a friend of mine, Kim, reached out to me and said, you know, don't get rid of stuff, because she did. And later on, she really regretted getting rid of some of that stuff. And so, you know, we did put it into our garage, and, you know, it's going to end up going into a storage unit, which I didn't want to have happen. But I think it's part of the process. I think, and I think, you know, your point of doing it earlier, I think makes it better, because there's less, or at least important things are, gotten out. But it's like an overwhelming task. And so, the stuff's important because, it's what's left of them. So, but anyways, I just wanted to put out there that, that was really good advice I got, was not to get rid of all the stuff, that I might regret getting rid of something that, I, could look at, like, and I think for her, Kim, I think it was like bookends, like that she's like, why would I ever want them? And now, like, she has a space and she wishes she has them, but she can't get them back because she donated them. So, take that. But what you alluded to, I think, is really important. And I want to give some credit here to Richard Franklin, who's an attorney. And he does some really great work about well-being trusts. Wonderful human being. I met him as a member of ACTEC, and being a part of ACTEC and meeting other fantastic attorneys across this nation like him has really made me a better attorney. But I saw him speak one time, and it's interesting. I think he spoke for like 10 or 15 minutes, and kind of really changed. It really made me stop and change how I approach this. And it is about lifetime gifting. And this could be money, but today we're really focusing on stuff. And one of the things he talked about in that speech was what he dubbed or labeled the King Charles effect. And what that is for all of us is just that people are living longer and longer. Think about how long Queen Elizabeth, honorable, wonderful human being she is, lived, and how King Charles couldn't become King Charles because she kept living. And now, like Prince William is, aging himself. I mean, I don't want to make him too old, but the idea of it is, as all of us live longer, we're not giving stuff down to the next generation. And so what that does for me as an attorney is it really thinks about more lifetime gifts. Should we give money earlier? And that's important in my state, in the state of Pennsylvania. We have an inheritance tax. So if we're going to hold on to money just for it to be taxed, and across this nation, every state's a little different. And there's also a federal estate tax, although at this point in time, the exclusion for the federal estate tax, is over almost $14 million. So for many people, that's not going to affect them. But the idea of it is, should we, if we're giving to kids, give it to them earlier if we have money that we're not going to need? And part of that is to avoid some inheritance tax. It also could be there's some income taxes that it makes sense to, take some money out of IRAs and maybe pay that earlier. But really, when we think about it, it's how it affects the person. So even if we take myself, when my grandfather died, my mom's dad died, she was younger. She was in her 30s, and he died in his early 60s. And she got the money, not much, but the money from that at a time that she was raising me, and she really needed the money, right? So I'm older, and I'm more at the height of my career. And if I got money today, would it be helpful to me? Probably not as much. I'm actually done with the college educations. I'm actually, in a different place. Not that, money isn't helpful, but the idea of it is that as we delay this inheritance by people living longer, when it finally gets to that next generation, are they in a place where it can be as meaningful? And I think about, a situation where maybe, there's somebody who's, always wanted a new kitchen, raising her children. Her mom has a lot of money, but continues to live. If mom gave some money today, does that help? Or for weddings or anything like that? Now in mom's situation, hey woman, it didn't matter because she didn't leave money to Buddy and I anyways. She left it to you grandkids, which actually makes more sense. But the idea of this is really just having a realistic conversation about giving earlier at a time when people need it. And whether we talk about money or we talk about stuff, like you got the stuff earlier at a time that you needed it when you were having your new apartment. Right,
because if she had waited, and I like all of her kitchen stuff, and I had already gone out and bought everything, it's a waste, right? So, I mean, of course, like we would have donated it or, you know, different things we would have. But at that point in time, then I have all of this new stuff. And I actually like that when I go to, you know, cook something or different things like that. Like I use her stuff. You know, even Steph, my sister, when she just moved into her house, like she kept some of Nan's stuff. So she just got married and did the whole wedding registry thing and all of that stuff. But she is very intentional about like, no, I have some of this stuff from Nan and I don't want to give this up, or, you know, I can give like this up. And so that's the box of stuff that we're taking back for like the younger cousins and or my brother DJ or different things like that. So, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, the King Charles effect talks about money, but the stuff is also important, you know, the pictures that are on my walls and different things like that. And again, like I was fortunate to like the stuff and be able to tell her that. But I also think, you know, when I turned 21, she had given me a piece of jewelry of hers that I had always really enjoyed. And so for her, that was like a milestone birthday. And so...
and she carried that on when everybody turned 21.
She did.
Right.
So, and for her, that was a fairness thing. Like she did that for me as the oldest. And so when everybody turned 21, but it was nice because we were able to like get all of her jewelry out and you were able to like go through it with her. And I remember her sitting there telling us stories about like how she got each piece of jewelry, which made it more special than just getting it. And you're like, oh gosh, like, you know, I remember, you know, when she passed and we got all of her jewelry back out again. And I was like, oh, like I remember Nan telling me that like, you know, Pap got this for her for like an anniversary or for her birthday or different things like that. You were able to understand the stories of some of the things. You know, it's funny. I don't know that we can not talk about her couch. So she kept her couch. And this couch is like, I don't actually know what happened to it afterwards. Did Uncle Buddy take it after?
I think he did. Yeah. He did.
And so it's funny now Uncle Buddy has it, but you know, I remember being at the farm the day that the couch got delivered. You and Pap had gone Christmas shopping. You guys went every year. And
which she didn't think this year, but I would say we were very good at Christmas shopping.
And so, you know, I remember this couch coming into the farm and he was so excited about this red leather couch.
It was beautiful.
It was a beautiful piece of furniture. And she looked at me and she was like, I didn't even know I wanted it.
Yeah. Which meant she didn't.
Yeah.
And I knew that when we were buying it, but I was at the age where I thought that was entertaining.
It was. And the couch and the coffee table to match. And it was funny when she was moving, you know, into the personal care home, she took the couch with her. Mm-hmm. And for her, like the couch it represented this like fun day of, you know, I remember, and I could not have been that old, but I remember the couch coming in and she definitely did not want that couch.
No, she was mad.
And so, you know, stuff has meaning and it's not the stuff that has the meaning, but it's the stories behind it. And so now when you walk into Uncle Buddy's house and you see the couch and like, I just like laugh to myself and it's like, you know, throughout the rest of her life, that couch was always a joke of she loves it now, but she hated that couch.
Well, I have to say, I slept on that couch the last year of her life many nights. It was a very comfortable couch.
It was a nice couch.
Yeah. Pap and I did a good job shopping. Absolutely.
And so, you know, I think we were fortunate too that we didn't really fight over the stuff, but it's just like everything else we've talked about. You know, we did an episode about birthdays. We've done episodes about planning your funeral and different things like that. This is just one more thing that you need a plan for and you need to have it written down. And it's about being intentional because again, like this is something that falls on the caregiver. I even think about like pictures are so important. Like, you know, it's interesting when we were preparing for Nan's funeral, there was a moment where like there were lots of pictures of Nan with me because we were going through printed pictures. But
yeah, and you were old enough that we still took the film to the store and printed them out, which should make you feel old, because your other grandchildren, they were younger and they're still in people's phones.
Okay, I didn't think we had to go there about that. And Nan always printed things in duplicate. So not only was there one picture of me, but there were two. And so this might not be something that people have to think about as much, but like how fun would it have been if we had gotten those digitized like during her life and she could have gone through them with us, right?
Right.
So also, sometimes I think about, we think about making visits easier or doing things. I also think, another transition that we have to talk about, and this is what makes me think about the boxes of pictures that were in our house, is sometimes people are able to age at home, which is really nice if that's what they want and if that's what they choose. But now you have to make room for all of these new items. Like sometimes you have to make room for a hospital bed. Fun fact, is really hard to get rid of after somebody passes away.
It is. It was actually one of my harder things. We did find a wonderful home for it, but it did take a while.
But, now you're bringing in this bed in an area where, like, if there's 2 floors to the house, you're probably putting it downstairs. Are you putting it in the living room? Do you now have to get rid of, like, living room furniture? What can we do with that? It can be, if you decide to sell some of this furniture, it can be a way to fund some of the caregiving or do something nice for that person because it's, their money for selling it. If you decide to gift it to a child or niece or nephew or grandchildren, that also can be really great. But it's about we all only have so much decision-making capabilities. So if you're able to kind of like make these decisions and make it more fun and make it part of like your everyday or your visit, like, if you took like a box of pictures and you went through them with her and then you went and got them digitized, I think she would have still made us keep the box of printed pictures.
Definitely.
But I would have, once she passed, I would have been like, okay, this is one less decision I have to make because they're already digitized. Her clothes, you talk about like, you bought the kits for the pillows. There are really great things that you can do. And sometimes, you can do them while they're living. Sometimes they change sizes, they grow out of clothes. Also like her work clothes, she no longer like wore anymore. And so maybe you could have done something with that, but, and then they could have it. And then, you pass it along. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about like interesting ways to get rid of things to make new keepsakes as well.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I rushed for like the pillow because it's what I knew about. And, but since then there's all kinds of neat things like, teddy bears. And, so I'd encourage people to like, look into, different options out there or assign somebody to look into different options. I know like that's definitely on my list. Like and as I go through this grief journey, I try to do everything at once and I couldn't. So now I just like, okay, one thing a week. And definitely, because we're here, the end of August and I want to make sure they get done before the holidays, that I'm going to make myself go down and, do that, pick out that clothing and, send that away and move that forward. So I think that's, important for people to really understand. I also think, when we talk about this, you talked about, somebody staying at home and aging in place, it was just a lovely thing. And in fact, quite honestly, it's what most people want. Mom chose to have more socialization. We live in a rural area, and so that has its own issues with driving and socialization. But I think sometimes, mom moving was a gift because it started this conversation. For those of you who are still at home and like you're not going anyplace, I love your idea, Court, of like starting to go through pictures, or making room for new things that have to come in, durable medical equipment, kind of the caregiving stuff. But I encourage people to like start thinking about this and going through that. And I, as we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it's great for us to say, oh, just, start talking about this. But, you may be in a family where maybe the loved one isn't ready to talk about it. Maybe you don't know how to approach it. And I would encourage people to to talk about it. And one way, I know a lot of times, we've talked about powers of attorneys and we've talked about, estate planning. And I know sometimes people call our office and they're like, well, I don't even know how to talk to my loved one about it. And, I think you can get professional help, So this is these are conversations I have with my clients every single day. So maybe somebody calls in and says, we know we have this problem. We have this stuff, this person's aging. Everybody's going to pass away at some point in time. We're going to have to do something with this stuff. And, that's something that, a lot of elder law and estate planning firms will, they may have an intake procedure where they need you to have some information, but we always have the ability for people to say, listen, I want to do this for my mom, but she's not ready to come to the table yet. And so I need some advice. And based on your specific situation, that's something that I would sit down with a client and talk about. What are ways that we can go around this? What are ways that we can approach this? And sometimes it is saying, I think you need to go see an elder law and estate planning attorney and start talking about that. And that can be really the first step. And even that conversation is a hard conversation. But there's a lot of really good help out there that can encourage you to do that. And I think, I think you could just make the appointment yourself and get some professional guidance. I think you could have the conversation and encourage your loved one to come with you. That will make it quicker. It might make it more cost effective if you can get that loved one to come with you because, it would be an extra appointment otherwise. But I think, seeking that professional advice to help, as attorneys, we are called attorneys, lawyers, but I've always liked the term counselor at law because a lot of times we are counseling our clients on how do you make these transitions and even how do you even have the conversation that we're trying to have. And so I encourage people not to just ignore it. Both from a decision-making standpoint, but also not ignore it from the whole idea of we really have to be thinking about how to have these conversations and how to move this forward.
I also think being really honest with yourself about your family situation, and if you have high conflict people in your family that don't have the ability to conflict resolute. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a time when you want to maybe get an attorney involved or get some sort of professional help in having these conversations, because the last thing you want to do is get to, like, you've just gotten through the funeral and then people start picking through the stuff
and taking it. We get phone calls like that all the time. Like, my brother just took this, right. And that's hard.
It is, because at the end of the day, all of what we're talking about, we did what Nan wanted. So we were very fortunate that she took our input, but she had a very detailed list of things that had value, either to her or monetarily. So I think about, we talk about her pictures, her David Armstrong pictures, they have value. Mm-hmm. And it was very clear, like, each person got one.
Right. But I would say to you, what people got wasn't based on the value of it. It was more sentimental about what was in the picture or what,
right.
You know what I mean? What did it depict, or whether or not somebody liked that one. And we tried really hard to make sure that that's what happened.
Yeah, it's funny. We all lucked out. We all had a different favorite.
Yes.
And I remember talking to, like, both of my siblings about the one that they picked, and they both said, I picked it because I remember, like, X and, like, walking into the farm and seeing it here, or different things like that. Or I think DJ picked, like, the apple one or whatever, which is the one I would have picked for him anyway, probably the one that Nan would have picked. But right. She allowed us some control in an environment in which she set up the parameters. And I think that that's really important, that because the parameters were preset and we all, at the end of the day, wanted to do what she wanted, we were able to kind of nip some of the conflict away before it started, but that's not the case for everybody. And so if you know that it's going to be something, or you know that like after the funeral, there are like things of value that they'll take, or that people feel like they have a right to.
Yeah, I think that happens. Like, I know from my perspective, a lot of times when families are fighting over stuff, at the end of the day, if you listen to both sides, they both feel like they had a right to the stuff. I mean, and it may be a flawed reasoning, but it's not that it's not authentic. And you just lost somebody that you love, so it's hard not to hold on to things tightly.
I also think, blended families, and I don't want to say that blended families are high conflict, because I think they can be done really, really well. But sometimes, when your emotions are already heightened, I think about things that Nan had that were actually Pap, that like came down from like the Armstrongs. Some of that stuff, we were lucky that, his kids didn't feel this way when they came down, but, could have been that they felt the right to some of that stuff.
Well, I think also Nan was very, very intentional of some of that does go back to them. Right. You know what I mean? But that's really hard, because when we talk about go back to them, where is the line there? Like, I've represented people who were married, like remarried as a second marriage, like 40 years.
Right.
And like that dining room table may originally have came from X, but it's 40 years. It's been sitting here, So I think sometimes those lines are hard. And again, it goes back to good planning. And at the end of the day, what matters is what the person who passed away wanted.
Right.
It was their stuff. And so we want to make sure that that's what we honor, and that we don't lose sight of that, as we're in our own grief and our own despair of, where does this stuff go?
So I hope that everybody listening kind of gets a better idea. This is really just to get you thinking about things, about how to approach these conversations, so that when you're in kind of like a point of like heightened emotion, you can lean back on decisions that have already been made, which I think is always really helpful. It also kind of, unlocks dealing with the stuff in the way that honors the person in the best way possible, and allows their memory to live on, or gives people some joy as maybe a change in diagnosis is happening.
And one thing I would just add, before you close this out, Cor, is you talked about the nativity scene, and I have my nativity scene from my grandmother, and she wrote that down. That was I was about 16 when she passed, and it was the one thing that like she didn't ask me. It was a different time, and she unfortunately died relatively suddenly. But she had written down that I was to get that nativity scene, and that means a lot to me. And one of the things I counsel my clients on a lot is, even if you can't figure out everything about all your stuff, picking one thing for each like person, each grandchild, each kid, is really can be very, very powerful in their lives. Like, just like Mom, I get that nativity scene out every year with, it's not Christmas to me until that's out. And I think that's important. And I would say to you again, just a kind of a tip, because I'm the person sometimes that's sitting on the opposite side of the table when somebody passes away. I've had situations where maybe there's 7 grandkids and 3 get something and the other 4 don't, or 1 doesn't. If whatever my real advice to you is, whatever classification, whether you take kids or you take grandkids or you take nieces and nephews, if you do somebody in that class, do them all. So it's really hard being that person, even if the relationship isn't as close. I would say to you, give something to every grandchild. Even if maybe because of location, maybe because of where people were in life, you were closer to one versus the other. I think that's important for people to really be thinking about.
I think that's a really good point. So if you're interested in kind of like starting this conversation and you're not sure, or you need some advice, we do have a list of attorneys in lots of different states. So you can head to planningandprotecting.com and hopefully find an attorney in your area that's willing to help you have these conversations, broach this subject. If you're just looking for some different resources, you can find those on the website as well. You can also follow us along on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And we thank you for listening.